All righty. Why don't we begin with a word of prayer, shall we? Heavenly Father, we thank and praise you for the gift of this day. We ask that you would open our minds and our hearts to all that you have for us, not only in your word.
You're muted now.
Yeah, now it's unmuted.
I think it's okay.
All right. Well, what it was doing is it reconnected. So
Yeah.
what happened? All right. So we'll do this, and then I'll have to go back to tell it to record again, or there won't be any recording.
Oh.
Well, no, I guess it is. Okay.
It's recording.
Yep.
Yeah.
I love technology when it works. That's my sister.
Your sister.
From Lebanon, that's Roberta from Lebanon, Ohio. So, all righty, here we go. Let God be true. Again, God says, man says, and recognizing that what man says is not coming from God, therefore by default, it's coming from the other side of the equation here. And as we get going here, our basic passage, if you will, comes from Romans chapter 3. And basically, let God be true and every man a liar, right? So we're going to try and understand what God has to say. And again, that we're steeped in his word and connected to him, so that when all of this comes at us, first of all, we can process it by his word. But secondly, that we can encourage other Christians and reach out to those who don't know Jesus. So we're going to try and gently do that. Today, we're going to focus on dinosaurs. And the reason we're here, this is a major Trojan horse, ironically, that could actually eat you. So, there we are. Yeah, it's one of those like, yeah, you stop to think about that and go, okay. Yes, indeed. Isn't that fun? So where did dinosaurs come from? If we take a look at Genesis chapter 1, and you've got it up on the screen, but you also have that on page 2 of this big handout. God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things, and the beasts of the earth according to their kinds. And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds, and the livestock according to their kinds, and everything that creeps on the ground according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. Now, I will point out that you will see the word kind or kinds in there repeated again and again and again and again. And we're going to pick that up later to understand what is actually being said here. Because one of the ways that Genesis is attacked is there's no way Noah could have carried all those animals on the boat. So we're actually going to talk about how many animals there probably were, including dinosaurs, and how that might have occurred. So as we wrestle with this, the other thing we want to think about is this, is there is a scientific definition of a dinosaur. And over here on the right, you've got some little plastic dinosaurs, and over there on the left, you have a little lizard on a rock. So why is one a lizard and one a dinosaur? Well, first of all, they're classified scientifically as Dinosauria. Well, so what? That's somebody figured that out. They are a reptile, which may be very large. Here's one of the big things. The hind legs go straight down on a dinosaur at the hip. On a reptile, they go sideways and then down. Dinosaur, the legs go straight down from the hip. If they've got 4 legs, it's primarily based on the hind legs, because you've got something like T-Rex that, we don't know what T-Rex did with those tiny little arms, but, but what's that?
Not
I guess so. Yeah, probably didn't give hugs. That's probably true. So recognize this, and so this also would take out of dinosaur the water animals, right? So plesiosaur is a sea-going creature that would probably fit this group of animals, but its legs are different. So yes, it is from the Cretaceous era, if you will, in the rocks, or one of the preceding ones. However, mainly they're land-based. Okay. So there are a few that kind of were like, yeah, they could go in the water and they could go on the land. Air breathing, all right, which would also be true of plesiosaur, as far as we know. That's the difference, though. So a crocodile is not a dinosaur because its legs go out sideways and then come down. Neither is an alligator. All right, etc. So here's another thing we want to think about, and we're going to look at Job in a moment. That's on the handout sheet. And you've also kind of got this paragraph there below Job. But the first official English translation of the Bible, which was the authorized King James Version, published in 1611. There were English versions published ahead of that, including Tyndale's. Of course, when they finally caught him, they burned him at the stake for translating it into English. But the pressure got great enough that they finally translated the Bible into English. In 1611, by the way, the language that was used was already archaic. And the thought was, we don't want to put God's word in the language of the commoners, so we're going to take the language back to a more, archaic form as to kind of the grandeur of God, reflecting all of that. So even when it was first published, it was old. And the reality is the people of that day could read that a whole lot better than we can. Because, as a matter of fact, if you go back to the original 1611 translation, you will find words in there that you'll kind of scratch your head about and go, what's that word? Because it has fallen out of use in the language. Curiously, the word dragon is used 21 times for the Hebrew word teni. There are some examples there. Sometimes it's monster, sometimes it's serpent in modern translations. So why the change? Because Bible translators translating Bibles into English believe the press release, the dragons are mythical beasts and dinosaurs are real. Perhaps the press release was wrong.
It would make a lot more sense if Satan was T-Rex, but that was how we were translating serpent.
Yeah, well, the thing is the reality is that there's a word there that describes huge creatures, and if we look at this stuff from Job here, all right, that's on the handout on page 2, this is God talking to Job. So, I realize in the book of Job, we have to be careful what we pay close attention to, because God in the end says that Job's 3 friends were not saying things that were correct about him. So if we read the stuff that the 3 friends are saying, go, yep, we get to the end and God says, nope. And we gotta go, oh, wait a minute, let's change our viewpoint on those things, right? Here, though, God is himself speaking. And he says to Job, behold, behemoth, which I made as I made you. Isn't that interesting? Affirming creation. He eats grass like an ox. Behold, his strength is in his loins, and his power is in the muscles of his belly. He makes his tail stiff like a cedar. What's a cedar?
Tree.
A tree. Ever seen an elephant's tail? Could you mistake that for a cedar? Could you mistake a hippopotamus's tail for a cedar? And yet there are Christians who go, well, behemoth might have been an elephant or a hippopotamus. Only if you don't pay attention to what God is saying. Okay? So the tail goes straight out. The sinews of his thighs are knit together. His bones are tubes of bronze. His limbs are like bars of iron. He is the first of the works of God. Let him who made him bring near his sword. For the mountains yield food for him, where all the wild beasts play. Under the lotus plants he lies, in the shelter of the reeds and in the marsh. For his shade, the lotus trees cover him, the willows of the brook surround him. Behold, if the river is turbulent, he is not frightened. He is confident, though the Jordan rushes against his mouth. Can anyone take him by his eyes or pierce his nose with a snare? So God is describing a very large creature here that goes on all fours, that eats vegetation, that has a long tail that looks like a tree sticking straight out. And there are many people, including myself, who believe that the behemoth was a sauropod dinosaur. And we know that those things could grow up to 80 tons. They were huge. They could be over 100 feet long. That would be a rather impressive creature, don't you think? Okay. And so part of it is this is described here, and we cannot back out of God's word and go, well, let's just try and be nice with the people who change their minds every other Tuesday on what's true and what's not in this area, and see what we can do. Leviathan is described in Job 41. He's even more fearsome. And, you know, it's like, well, maybe that was just like a shark. Okay, well, when you read about scales that arrows and spears bounce off of, I don't think a shark fits. Because unless Jaws was wrong, you can shoot arrows into a shark. Right? So the issue is that people are trying to push and pull instead of taking God's word as it stands. We're trying to back human ideas in there and say, well, we're sure this is what God was talking about. Right. That's a dangerous position to take. So what's in a word? Where did the word dinosaur come from? If you go, there are little page numbers on the bottom of this. I don't know if you're looking at it from the web, it's multiple documents, but page 5, which is dinosaurs, or is it dragons, is kind of the header up there. Etymology is the study of where English words come from, or where words come from, period. I mean, it's used for all languages, right? And basically, it's linguistics that go, here's the word, can we trace this back to an original root? And I don't know if you've ever looked at English, but you know, there are words that come out of the Latin, there are words that come out of the Greek, there are words that come out of the German, there are words that come out of the French. We pretty much get words from everywhere, right? So the question is, where did dinosaur come from? It was invented in 1841 by Sir Richard Owen. From a Greek word, dinios, terrible, soros, lizard. So when was the first translation of the Bible? 1611. Because I've had kids ask me, why does it talk about dinosaurs in the Bible? Because the word didn't exist. And by the time the word did exist, we believe the press release, the dragons and dinosaurs were not the same thing. We'll wander into that. So let's think about this. How old are dinosaurs? Because everybody, yes, everybody knows that dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago. Or was it less than 4,500? Well, let's think here. So let's go to page 11, and I'm going to kind of walk you through at least some of what's on pages 11 to 26. 11 is about hadrosaur skin. Sorry, I got to get the pronunciation correct. And the reality is here they are. They're in Alberta, Canada. They find a fossil and they go, look at this cool fossil. It's a skin impression. And the more they played with it, the more they realized the pieces were peeling off. It was actual dinosaur skin. And then they're all like scratching their heads going, how can we have skin that's 70 million years old? You can't. You just can't. Right? And we'll look at this. It gets even worse for them as it goes along. So basically, he's got a hydra. hadrosaur skin sample. And they're really pretty excited because if they can figure out the mellosomes, they might even be able to figure out what color was this dinosaur. Because up to this point, and I know, we've seen Jurassic Park. We know what color the dinosaurs are. Really? I don't think so. This is Hollywood. They make stuff up. It would not have been a good movie if you just saw skeletons walking around. Right? It just wouldn't have. So you've kind of got to work on all of this stuff. And I think part of it is, even if this thing is part of a fossilization process, on page 12, toward the bottom, it's the second to last paragraph, last sentence. This is a Dr. Bell who basically says obvious skin is something that decays rapidly. So fossilization must have been incredibly fast. And the story of standard story of fossilization is you have this huge dinosaur trucking along and it dies. And it falls into the water as it dies. And it falls into water deep enough as it dies to be completely covered by the water. And then over time, the sediment gradually builds up around the dinosaur and stops the microbial action of decay that normally would happen, and stops the scavenging that normally would happen. Okay, and then somehow that, you've got the water present there, and in the water you have enough calcium carbonate or some other fossilization mineral. Most fossils are calcium carbonate. That's limestone, by the way. Okay, one of the most common minerals on the face of the earth. And it replaces the soft tissue and all that kind of stuff with rock. And then the water dries out, and then someday, it gets exposed, and somebody comes along and goes, look, it's a dinosaur. Okay, the problem is it's everything but scientifically accurate in every respect. And we'll look at that in a moment. So the next one is DNA detected in duckbill dino. In that first paragraph on page 13, you have the researcher saying, I couldn't believe it, my heart almost stopped beating, because they found evidence of proteins, chromosomes, chemical markers of dinosaur DNA. Isn't that interesting? Now, if you look at the next paragraph, it says dozens of disarticulated baby dinosaurs were discovered in the 1980s, etc. What does disarticulated mean? They were ripped to shreds. And they found dozens of them. So how does that happen? Does some predator come along and just kind of round them all up, or a group of predators, and tear them all apart and just leave them? If a predator kills something, it's going to want to eat it, right? Which means it probably isn't going to fossilize. On the other hand, if you have a worldwide global flood with tidal waves running around the planet, at some point, some wave picks them up, beats them all to pieces, and buries them. That makes a whole lot more sense now, doesn't it? So the other thing is this, it's the second to last paragraph. They did some testing, and it says basically the results shown mean that double-stranded DNA with a minimum length of 6 base pairs is present in these cells, and it may be much longer. Now we know DNA is a very unstable molecule. It decays rapidly. So they're going like 75 million years, we don't get it. Well, that's because it's probably not that old. On the top of page 14, they had a paper that calculated that DNA should be totally fragmented to 1 base pair in about 6.8 million years, even if it's frozen to 5 degrees below 0 centigrade. And recognize this isn't even 1/10 of the age claimed for the fossil. Not to mention the fact, how do you fossilize a living dinosaur and flash freeze it for 75 million? Well, we've got stuff that comes out of Siberia with edible plants in their mouth and stomachs. The woolly mammoths coming out of Siberia, But again, even at those temperatures, nobody can explain why they're as intact as they are. Because even at those temperatures, decay still happens. It's just much slower. Right? So it's all of these things. The next article, starting on page 15, DNA in bone cells found in dinosaur bone. This talks about Dr. Mary Schweitzer. She is a paleontologist. She was one of the first ones who published the fact they were handling a T-Rex bone and they broke the thing. Oops. And they looked and they went, and I don't know if it's when they were digging it out of the rock or it got dropped. I don't remember that piece of the story, but they broke it. Somebody said, "What's that on the inside of the bone?" And they went, "Oh." So they sliced it and they put it under a microscope. If you go to that indented quote at the bottom of page 15, it was totally shocking, Schweitzer says. I didn't believe it until we'd done it 17 times. They ran the test 17 times before she believed that it was hemoglobin. She was rejected by numerous journals for publication because all the journal editors said, we know hemoglobin can't last 65 million years. There's no way that you have hemoglobin there. We're not publishing the article. It's wrong. Except it was right. In the meantime, they have since found markers in other things that basically indicate they have remnants of DNA. Again, now we sort of know how fast hemoglobin decays because, we use blood to treat people who've been injured or surgery or all that kind of stuff. And so we have a really good idea of the preservation of that, right? And even if it's inside a bone, it is not going to last that long. There's no known deal there. The story that's told is, well, dinosaur DNA is really stable. No, it isn't. Okay, a recent report on page 17 says actually DNA is highly reactive. On a good day, about 1 million base pairs of DNA in human cells are damaged. That's while we're living. Thank God for the repair mechanisms, or none of us would be here, right? Things would go horribly wrong and we'd die. So ultimately, as we look at this, toward the end of page 18, just right above the conclusion there, their team detected a special protein, histone H4, because one of the things was, well, bacteria got into the bone and it's bacteria DNA that you're seeing there. This was one of the explanations. But bacteria doesn't have the histone H4 protein. It's not bacteria DNA. It's T-Rex DNA. So basically, it's just incredible. In her early quotes, one of the things she said was exactly looking like a slice of modern bone. But of course, I couldn't believe it. I said to the lab technician, the bones are, after all, 65 million years old. How could blood cells survive that long? They can't. But we are trying to find all sorts of explanations for how they can. So as we kind of walk through here, on page 21 and 22, you've got some pretty pictures that basically hemoglobin in a T-Rex bone. Those are some of her early slides, if you will. And notice here, here's the other thing on page 23, dinosaur soft tissue preserved by blood, question mark. Scientists are trying to find a solution. So they took ostrich blood vessels and they put them in water and watched them disintegrate. Then they took ostrich blood vessels and they put them in a concentrated blood solution high in iron, and they were still fresh after 2 years, which they immediately translated to 65 million. I don't know how you get there from there, but that's what they did. Okay, now unfortunately, there are a few problems with this theory. So on page 24, first, The ostrich vessels are incubated in this concentrated solution of red blood cells. So it's not even red blood cells, it's a very concentrated solution. Ancient dinosaurs and other fossils did not have the advantage of scientists treating their carcasses in a blood soup concentrate. Oops. Second, many of the still fresh biochemicals described in the literature don't show evidence of iron, which is what supposedly preserved them. So if they were preserved by iron, why is there no iron when they dig them up? Another one of those cute little questions. The third thing is for the experimental control, the authors kept, and this is on page 25, they kept the ostrich stuff soaking in water, and yet we find most of these fossils in very, very arid areas. So even in terms of their control sample, said, look, this disintegrated quick, this is still here, so we think we can stretch the timeline. Their control, the control sample that they used was incorrect, is basically what he's pointing out. And the other thing is this, iron increases the resistance to enzymatic or microbial digestion. That means if there's iron present, the enzymes don't break it down, and you don't get the bacteria in there to break it down. However, it doesn't stop the natural decay of the organic chemical, which is very fragile. So ultimately, in all of this stuff, they're just kind of saying, hey, we're trying to find a solution to the problem that we have discovered. And at the end of the day, when we ask how old are dinosaurs, we have to look at this biologic material. And we have to ask some really pointed questions. How is it that we're finding this in these fossils if they are really that old? The other thing that is found, and I don't have that in the notes, but the other thing that's found in this is if you take a dinosaur bone and and part of it is some of those bones are not fully mineralized, so you still have actual bone there, and you test the actual bone, you get a carbon-14 date. Now here's the issue with carbon-14. It's got a lot of problems as a dating system, although it's way more accurate than any of the nuclear dating systems. But the thing with carbon-14 is our equipment can find no detectable traces of carbon-14 past 900,000 years. So if I have a 70 million year old dinosaur bone in my hand and I send a sample in and I get a carbon-14 date, we have a problem. All sorts of made up stories. And a very firm belief that evolution in deep time is true. I just refuse to see, we recognize this is a problem, but we just haven't figured out the solution yet. That's the standard answer. Well, we just don't know enough yet. We'll eventually figure it out. But we're sticking with the story, right? Right? It's worse than it. Yeah, well, yeah, I don't know if we're at Jurassic. I don't know if we're at Jurassic Park yet, because the DNA they found is just sections. It's not, to find complete dinosaur DNA would be an incredible find. And not to mention the fact, how do you clone the goofy thing? You have to use a live animal to do that. What do you use, right? And as far as we know, most dinosaurs were eggs, right? I don't know, maybe get an iguana or a crocodile or something. I don't know. But at any rate.
I feel like we could waste our money on trying to complete a dinosaur genome project and close to some of the other things we're wasting the tax money on.
Well, that's true. I don't think it would go anywhere, but
Green energy, we're afraid to put ourselves in dinosaurs in the future.
Correct. We'll go back to the Flintstones where we're using the dinosaur in the quarry. Exactly. Yeah, exactly. It would be perfect if it doesn't eat you on the way. So there we go. Yeah, okay. Okay, well, yeah, some animals are not as easily domesticated as others. At any rate, bottom of page 2, the biologic materials found in dinosaur, why are they such a big deal? There's no known processes that allows this material to survive anywhere near millions of years. We know how delicate hemoglobin is, how fast it breaks down, even under ideal conditions. The same is true for DNA. We do know that such biologic materials do last in mummified remains for several thousand years. How do we know that? The Egyptians. But even there, you had human intervention that preserved those bodies in a certain way. And you remove some of the things from the body that would tend to disintegrate the whole body. That's why they would take out the brain. That's why they would take out the internal organs. Because as those things decay, they would create other things that would attack the rest of the body. Right? It was just the natural way of it. And somehow they had figured that out. Right? Scientists who insist that these bones are in fact millions of years old have failed to produce any plausible theory of preservation. None of it makes sense. So let's deal with this one. If true, how did dinosaurs fit on Noah's Ark? So here's our little thought experiment. How big is the very largest 80-ton sauropod when it's born? Anybody know? It's an egg about that big, just a little bigger than a football. That is the largest dinosaur known, starts this size. For real. We found the eggs. We found they're very rare, but we found some fossilized eggs. We go, okay, we know what this is. Now the other deal is this, is we don't find a lot of young and juvenile dinosaurs in the fossil record. And I think part of that is if you think about the mechanism of the flood, they can't run as fast. They're going to get overtaken earlier. And if their bodies are washed back and forth too many times, there's nothing left to fossilize, right? It's just been destroyed. The ones we do find, though, on any of the dinosaur, species where we have young ones, it appears that once they hatch, they stay small. They get progressively bigger, but they stay small for a long period of time, and then they hit a growth spurt. So let's think about this. If you're God, who's all-knowing and all-wise, you would tell Noah to go out and get the 80-ton, 100-foot-long sauropod that's about ready to die, right? No, you tell him to go get the juvenile, who's small, who's going to hit the growth spurt once he gets off the ark, and then start reproducing. Does this make sense? So let's go with this. The folks who have looked at this at Answers in Genesis think there may have been up to 55 dinosaur kinds, okay? And from bara, the word kind, and we'll look at that in a little more detail in a moment, but kind means this is this kind of animal. Now, why 55? Because we don't have any living specimens to figure out was that and that crossbreed, okay? Anything that's a cat on the face of the earth, from the largest lion to the tiniest little house cat, is all one family. They're all one kind. Now, can a lion and a house cat interbreed? No, but if you track them through, you find connections all the way through until you eventually get to the lion, you eventually get to the leopard, you eventually get to the lemur, the puma, the bobcat, all of that stuff, right? And they have literally either found examples in the science where this animal and that animal had offspring that was able to reproduce and kind of started a new thing, right? Or we've looked at the DNA and we've recognized, yep, the DNA can reproduce. With dinosaurs, we don't have that luxury, but recognize this is not thousands of dinosaurs. It's 110. The average size, fully grown, is about a sheep. Most of your dinosaurs are tiny. The big ones that make the movies are exciting. By the way, the Velociraptor, in the fossil record, they're this big. Okay, but they wouldn't have made a very good movie if they were only 18 inches tall. that little bugger come to bite you, you can just swat him away, right? I mean, I suppose if there are enough of them, it would be a problem. But certainly not one that stands and looks at you in the eye, right? Yeah, Hollywood has just done us a whole lot of favors here, haven't they? And it's great if it's a movie, but if you start believing that it's real. So the question then that we want to think about here, right, is, whoops, did I miss a slide? Oh, here, did dinosaurs live with people? Shh, the sneaky dinosaurs did it under an alias, so we wouldn't know. Let's go to page 5. And starting on page 5, you have dragon history in ancient cultures, right? It's even acknowledged in a 1973 World Book quote that dragons, strangely like actual creatures, they look like giant reptiles, dinosaurs, who inhabited the earth. And again, pointing out it wasn't until 1841 that we had the word dinosaur. Before that, people called them dragons. So if we go to page 6, we have here kind of another, there's an ongoing summary of dragon history and where we find this. It goes back to the Hebrew, but it quotes Marco Polo, it quotes the Greek historian Herodotus, it quotes a number of other things. There's a whole thing here that we won't bother to read. That's why I gave it to you in print. You can read it at home. Marco Polo in China describes these creatures. Okay. And as far as I know, Marco Polo lived in the modern era. So starting on page 7, you have a whole bunch of, here's the location, here's the information. On the left column is the date. And notice that there are some of these dates that go all the way up into the 18 and the 1900s. So it's not like this stuff was not out there, right? But everybody knew that it couldn't be a dinosaur. It had to be something else. Now, many of these also were aquatic. All right, which technically is not a dinosaur. If you go to page 9, there's another list there, right, that gives you through a variety of centuries here, the 1200s, the 1500s, the 1700s, and ultimately going, hey, this is what people are reporting. Now, ultimately, many of these reports and descriptions occur before we have modern science that figured out how bones go together. Some of the early reconstructions of how bones went together are almost comical. You look at the creature and go, who came up with that idea? Before they studied it, right? On page 10, you've got dragon legends, truth behind the tales. And again, this is Bodie Hodge. This is part of his article. Look at all of the different places: Australia, Babylon, which is Iraq, China, Egypt, England, North Africa, Sweden, Peru, and Utah. You've got reports all over the world. Pictures, artwork, all sorts of stuff all over the world that basically says these things lived with modern human beings. So again, let me see if I can figure out where I'm at here now without dropping everything on the floor. There we go. I am on page 3, the top of page 3. Kind of the summary of this section is that images from around the world, from long before modern scientific era, long before people figured out how to reconstruct them, depict creatures called dragons. Now, one of the things that I will mention, and you've got some subpoints under there, this is a little more expensive book by Vance Nelson, but basically what he has done is he has taken, in this particular piece, all right, he's taken artwork or sculptures or line drawings and put them next to reconstructed dinosaurs all over the world. How did they figure this out? Right? How did they figure this out? And ultimately, you know, if we look as well, if we go to page 27, if you will, in this whole mess. This is artwork in Paris. You've got sauropod dinosaurs on a device designed to make a pattern, right, on page 27, with their necks intertwined. Nobody would have ever thought of it. You know, but the reality is if you go to the next page, you've got something from, you know, this impression that's made by that cylinder. But then if you go to the bottom of page 28, you notice the brass carving on the bottom there? That's on Bishop Bell's tomb in Carlisle, England. His tomb is surrounded by these brass pieces that have animals of all sorts on them, including a pair of sauropod dinosaurs with their necks intertwined. So first of all, did the animals behave that way? Nobody knows. But apparently, artists thought so in a variety of places, one from Babylon, one in England. This guy was buried in 1496 in the chapel floor. You don't do that anymore, thankfully. But there it is. And ultimately, if you kind of walk through this, again, images and artwork, mosaics, all sorts of stuff. If you go to page 32, take a look at that carving. On page 32, that's a blow up of a carving from a Cambodian temple. That thing looks an awful lot like what we would call a stegosaurus. And the smaller picture off to the side, this temple just has all these different animals carved all around the doorway. So why is a mythical beast carved with all of the other ones that we know were there? That's an interesting question to contemplate. So in reality, these things really, there's a lot of evidence that dragons lived with people. And what we've done is we've redesigned the name. So fossils, not exactly as we've been told. I talked a little bit about this. This is an ichthyosaur giving birth. How fast did it have to be fossilized? How fast did it have to be fossilized? If you go to page 37 in here, whoops, not 37. Let's go back to page 35. Okay. Sorry, 33. Can't read my own handwriting. That's terrible. This particular diagram on page 33, I've seen with my own two eyes at the Field Museum in Chicago. It is no longer on display. And I think one of the reasons that it's no longer on display is if you flip the page, some clever creationist took their diagram, and then we just tried to figure out how many of these things on the diagram actually exist. Look at all the zeros. Where do we have the fossils? Out here on the right. Where do we have any of the transitional forms? None. Not a one. Not even something as a suggested transitional form. Okay. If you go to page 35, you have a school of fish there. There's 259 of them. This is a fossil, not a picture. This is a fossil. How fast did that have to happen? And we also, well, fossilization takes thousands of years or millions of years. No, it doesn't. There's another one on page 36 of one fish having lunch. He didn't get to finish. Okay, he's now preserved in stone. All right. And as we think about this, yeah, that's basically it, right? The Cambrian explosion, okay, on 37 and 38 is what they call, what we find in the fossil record at, according to evolutionists, 540 or 500 to 541 million years ago. Recognize in this Cambrian explosion, we have over 40 major animal groups. and they appear out of nowhere. And I'm quoting an evolutionist. So you have the Precambrian layers, which have virtually nothing in them. And then you have the Cambrian explosion, where you have 40 different major animal groups right now, including some things that look like this, that no longer exist. Not at all. Not at all. Not at all. So I've also given you some things in there about acts and facts. One of the things that I'll mention in this article is a geologist called Mary Anning, who lived from 1799 to 1894, who found some fossils in England. She found an eyeball from, I'm trying to remember what that thing was from. They used it as a magnifying glass. So it must not have been much of a rock fossil. Okay. Ichthyosaurus. And they also found ancient squid, and they took the dried out, theoretically fossilized fruit bag, and they put water with it, and they drew pictures with it. This was while all of this long age stuff was creeping into geology. So the evidence was very much there. So let's think about how we might respond here. And we're on a rescue mission, right? So the first thing is we want clarity. What does God's word say about the origin of animal life? And are dinosaurs animals? Yes, they are. That's all day 6. They were created the same day human beings were. They're slightly older than us. God created the animals, then he created us, right? On that day. What does God's word say about created kinds? We're going to get to that in a minute. What is the foundation of deep time? And again, we got to keep asking that question. If deep time is not true, all of this, every last bit of it crumbles. And in many respects, deep time doesn't help it, but people think it does, right? So let's think about this. A word on kinds. The study of living things is easier because we not only have DNA, but real life ability to experiment. So for instance, if you were to go to the Creation Museum in Kentucky, you would see a zonkey, which is a donkey, and a zebra. You would also see a zorse, which is a horse and a zebra. They have them down there. You can go look at them. They're fascinating animals. Guess what? All horse kind. How many horses did you need on the ark? 2. Everything else comes from there, right? So dog kind, for as another example, wolves, coyotes, jackals, dogs, all dog kind. Not hyenas, surprisingly. Hyenas are their own little thing. All right. So many extinct kinds may be related, but we don't know because we don't have living examples to figure it out. So here's some more. In 2014, estimates indicate fewer than 1.8 million documented species of organisms in the world. Over 98% are fish, invertebrates, or non-animals like plants and bacteria. So guess what? That leaves 34,000 known species. Well, that still sounds like way too many animals to fit on the boat. But recognize species is a scientific discriminator. It is not kind. If you go back to dogs, who are all interrelated, wolf is a different species from coyote, is a different species from your poodle, which is, by the way, and this is true, if you took all of the DNA away from a dog that made it a dog, what you would have left is a poodle. This is true. The list of diseases those things are prone to runs to almost 2 pages. You've lost so much dog DNA that it's just curious that it still lives. At any rate, you know, so 34,000 species are not distinct kinds. Estimates are that this represents fewer than 1,400 kinds. So that's about 3,000 animals. That's doable, you think? Yeah.
So, a species.
A species is a scientific discriminator.
Of a kind.
No. No. In other
Sorry,
words, when Linnaeus described animals and came up with his first taxonomy, you start very broadly. Either you are, and oh man, yeah, you're taxing my little gray cells hard here. there's two major divisions. In one division, you basically just have a number of bacteria and lichen and all that kind of stuff. The other division eventually leads to animals, but it starts with bacteria. So you got bacteria going both ways, but then this one goes, and I don't remember how it all goes. You've got, I think, family, then genus. I don't know. Do you know, Roberta? Kingdom, phylum,
Kingdom, phylum,
class. Say it again.
class, order,
Yeah, okay.
Genus, species.
And so,
genus, species.
right. And so species is way down here. Kind may be closer to family, although it's not a direct correlation. All right. Just recognize one is a way that we go when we're looking at this thing. What is it? Where does it fit? Where does it fit in the classification system? And not the classification system is bad. It's just this is how we look at things. Ultimately, what the folks down at Ark Encounter think is the worst case, fewer than 6,750 animals. And this is things like, for instance, if you go through there, when you get to the display where they have the bats, you will have all the bats. Well, they take up just a lot of space, don't they? The reason you have all the bats, and the sign will say, we think some of these may be interrelated and may have more here than we need, but nobody's done the research. We don't know if this bat and that bat, if they get together, could make little bats. All right. And nobody's traced it out because nobody is really carefully interested in that. Now we are interested in things like cattle, and things like sheep, and things like horses. And so we've got a lot of stuff in the scientific literature that says this and this and this and this and this is all related and they can all interbreed. So they're one kind. Can interbreed, yes. So even things like a mule, even things like a mule with a horse and a donkey, you can interbreed and get the mule, but it's sterile, right? But it's not its own kind. It comes out of the other kind. Where if a horse and a zebra interbreeds, you get a zorse, and the zorses can have little baby zorses. It's very curious. All right.
What we're saying is that everything that we have now, 34,000 species, all evolved from those 3,000 animals.
Yeah.
They have baby little cattle
Yeah.
and little horses.
Well, and the thing is some of these original kinds were much smaller than what we have today.
Yeah.
I mean, if you look at the horse kind on the Ark, it only stands about that tall.
They still exist.
They still exist. The thing is, and it's just like, and this is what breeders have found. Why do we have so many different kinds of dogs? Because people go, hey, here's this thing that we can do, and we can create a new dog. And if we can get it certified, we can sell them for a lot of money.
Yeah.
All that kind of stuff goes on, right?
I wonder what would happen if we mixed it.
Well, the thing is, though, is you can't breed the dog with the cat. It doesn't work. Again, there are gaps in the DNA between these kinds. When you look at the DNA, at the level of DNA, inside a particular kind, the DNA all has a whole lot of similarity. You go from one kind to another, you find there's a bunch of stuff that's different between this and that. So ultimately, what illogical fallacies are being used? That they're fantasies too. I've got examples of all of these in the notes. I've kind of given you sentences on all of those. If I can figure out where I've got myself to here. I think I'm on page 4 at this point. Or page 3, yeah, page 4, 3 to 4. So for instance, one of the ones that shows up an awful lot in this particular conversation is the straw man fallacy. Who can build a boat to transport a sauropod dinosaur that weighs about 80 tons and is over 100 feet long and still have room for anything else? Well, you've set up a straw man. You've set up something that is simply not correct. It's not a correct representation of the position in order to knock the position down. Well, I would agree with you that I'm not putting an 80-ton sauropod on the Ark. I'll put a little baby one on the Ark. Might grow to be 80 tons, right? And so forth. So I've given.
The dinosaurs could still be alive today.
Most people think they probably have gone extinct. There's a couple of reasons. The big herbivores needed to eat literally an incredible amount of food to live. And as the climate settled down after the flood and there was less vegetation, many of them probably died out. Secondly, if you go back to the dragon stories, those things were viewed as a threat because they ate the livestock, they ate your children, they ate anything they could get a hold of. So guess what? If somebody comes along who's really like, hey, I'm a big He-Man and I got a spear or sword or whatever, and you're sharp enough to go kill the thing, you're going to be a hero. Now, I might kill you instead, but the thing is you'd wipe it out. I mean, if we had wolves running around Kendallville snatching up pets, pretty soon we'd be out there looking to get rid of the wolves, right? Although in our day and age, we probably couldn't kill them because of the, Species Act, blah, 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 blah. But back in the day, no such thing. It's like, that thing's dangerous. We know where it lives. Let's go kill it. Okay? Yes. Today, we would just have to let the wolves run off with the children. So we're going to show genuine. It probably would be lunch, but we don't want to think about that. We want to show genuine respect. We want to listen well. All right. But can you see the humor in some of this? I mean, and don't be afraid to use that in these conversations. Define the terms. We need to ask good questions. Hey, have you heard that they found like DNA stuff in dinosaur fossils? Really? I didn't think it could last millions of years. And just let that marinate, right? Focus on the concept here of head, heart, hands. If we're talking about head, the biologic material found in hemoglobin and DNA, there's no known mechanism. All right, we talked about that. Conditions for fossil formation, it can happen very quickly. As a matter of fact, there are some places around the world where you have this bubbling water coming out of the ground that is just saturated with calcium carbonate. And they drop things in there like teddy bears and bowler hats and bags of flour, and they fossilize in several months. And they pull them out and go, here, yeah, here's your thing. All right, it just has to be the right conditions. So, I get upset when I discover something I've been told is true might be completely false. How about you? All right, a hands person. My way to get into this, I love to get kids excited about science. Dinosaurs is a great way to do that. I want to make sure I'm giving them accurate information. Because the hands person wants to make a difference in somebody's life by what we're doing, right? And if we're giving them false information, there it is. The whole idea of story, the cultural approach is to tell a story. Awesome, fearsome, amazing dinosaurs, tales of lost worlds, speculation presented as absolute fact in compelling and stunning movies, and the whole everybody knows approach. We need to be able to tell this story. We have a creative God. Animals, including dinosaurs, come in a stunning array of types and sizes and capabilities. That same God creates us. Beauty, talent, uniqueness. We brought death and destruction into the world, and yet we have this hope in Jesus Christ. So it looks at God's creativeness and realize these animals initially were all herbivores. When we messed it up, T-Rex got hungry, okay, for other things, right? So weaknesses in historical science, I'll run this very quickly. Lots of evidence that the Earth and the universe is young. Catastrophes bring about most geologic change. The flood explains what we see. And modern geologists are discovering this. It's kind of like the 800-pound gorilla in the room that nobody wants to talk about. No theoretical path of the jump from non-life to life has come close to surviving objective scientific scrutiny. Not a single one. No theoretical path from a single cell to human beings or any more complex form of life has come close to surviving objective scientific scrutiny. Again, not a single one. The suggested mechanisms, natural selection and mutations for evolution from goo to you through the zoo, fail to provide the needed increase in information. All right. And ultimately, what we looked at today, well, not, I'm sorry, haven't gotten there yet. Modern genetics has demonstrated we're all related. Every human being can trace their descent from one male and one female. Now, again, the culture will not say this was Adam and Eve. It will describe Eve as mitochondrial Eve, which was one woman of a population of larger human beings. And for whatever reason, none of the other mitochondria from any of the other women was passed on. We just got hers. And some of them will talk about Y chromosome Adam, but it's not the Adam of the Bible. Okay, again, bigger population. His DNA was the only one that got passed on. Ultimately, everybody else died out. Mitochondrial clock suggests the one female lived only about 6,000 years ago. Mitochondrial DNA, 3 major variants, which align with the flood account, the wives of Noah's sons. All right, finding hemoglobin and DNA in dinosaur fossils raises serious questions about the age and the geologic layers where we find the fossils, right? And recognize, we date this like, how old is the dinosaur? Well, it's in this layer. It's that area. How old is that layer? We found a dinosaur in there, so it's this old. It's just this little big circle that goes round and round. The age of the layer gets dated by the dinosaur gets dated by the age of the layer. Whew, boy, I wish I could do that with my tax preparation. You know, hey, I don't have to pay you because I haven't paid you, here's, right, sure, I'd be in jail. Evidence from around the world indicates that humans and dinosaurs have lived at the same time, and it's recent. All right. The concept of deep time entered science as a philosophical belief, often with the express intent of removing Christian influence and belief from society. As such, this concept is a faith system, not science. Actual known science presents huge problems for deep time in every branch of science. We have scratched just the tiniest surface of it. Astrophysics, cosmology, biology, geology, genetics, you name it. And there are lots of indicators that deep time isn't true. Again, if I'm philosophically bonded to deep time, I am not going to pay attention to the evidence. Next week, Sub is going to be here. It'll be Mr. Walls. So hopefully all will work well. Truth, part 1. That will be fun. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, and we'll spend a couple of weeks on that. I think the direction I'm going to go, because it'll be easier for him to teach that one than some of the other stuff that's bouncing inside my skull, is to kind of step back and take a look at the whole idea of worldview and how that shapes how we perceive things to be true. And, it is very relevant to society today because, when I grew up, I didn't think that the communist worldview would have any real relevance in the United States of America. Recognize that right now in major school systems all over the country, it's being taught under a Black Lives Matter curriculum, or deep empathy curriculum, or deep justice, or deep, I forget. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. It's all over the place. It is all over the place. And we need to understand what that worldview says, because it does not lead to any place good. So, blessings on your week. I got to go record the 10:30 service. Well, and take care. What I'm trying to do is give you information here, right? And I'm going to go ahead and end.